find her standing by the way.
Welcome to the first episode of the MEON Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the revival of Irish intellectual life. For our first episode, we're joined by Peter Ryan. Peter Ryan is the CEO and founder of Ryan Research, where he consults on economics, technology, and history, as well as business strategy. His work has been featured in an array of publications, ranging from UnHerd to Gript. Recently, he published an essay entitled Silicon Valley's Trojan Horse: Irish Nationalists Beware of MAGA Libertarians, from MEON Journal. Our discussion will centre on the main themes of this essay. Peter, welcome to the MEON Podcast.
Great to be here. Happy to talk about my essay.
In light of Trump's recent inauguration, it's fitting that today's discussion centres on Trumpism and its gestation from its populist, middle American beginnings to its current formulation, a formulation which seems to be inoffensive to the same elites which shunned him in 2015 and 2016, whether they be in the media or, especially, in Silicon Valley. Preceding weeks, we've witnessed a reversal in Zuckerberg's position on content moderation. Musk's support for Trump has been instrumental, and the latter credited him on Monday. My question is, why has Trump been embraced by elite quarters? Does this era signify the replacement of NGOs by tech bros, as David McWilliams put it?
Trump has been absorbed into the tech bro nexus because, there was always a tech bro faction. If we recall, Peter Thiel spoke at the GOP convention back in the 2016 campaign. And there were some other more quieter tech bros surrounding him. So there was always a sliver of that, but it's definitely pre-election really exploded. And then after the election, as we've seen with the inauguration, he had the front row of big tech CEOs. A lot of the more neutral to left-wing CEOs and companies have started to come around. So there's been this real big tilt. And I would look at that as Trump making more concessions to the tech bro interest group than he otherwise would back in the 2016 campaign. So to understand this, you first have to understand that Trump 2016 was a different campaign than Trump 2024, and thus there's different policies. And then number two, the tech bro interest group has forces pushing against it that it needs somebody like Trump to break down barriers for them, whether it be regulations, legal matters where they're being, persecuted by various government agencies for, wrongdoing or things they can't do. So there was a lot of regulation blockages there that some of them wanted to get around. You can think of Andreessen Horowitz and that sort of collection of guys that are very big into crypto. And, whether it's them getting sued, them not being able to do pump and dumps, Trump being more and more favorable to deregulation of that sector made it a big, win for them to come around to him. So those two forces really came together to really make Silicon Valley one big Trump faction. And of course, Elon Musk as well was a big factor in this. And if you look at him individually, you can understand that he's a man dependent on government contracts for most of his business wealth and sustainability. And his ability to get preferential treatment from a government administration is vital. So these are very personal interests that these men would have and women. So that is the prism that I view their turnaround to him. And he was willing to find a strong, wealthy interest group that would give him political donations and overall support to win. So that really, in a nutcase, is why that exists today.
So it seems you're sort of emphasizing the economic and structural imperatives which undergird this shift. But in the case of someone like Thiel, who for a long time has made comments which could be construed through the prism of post-war liberal democracy as dissident. He for a long time has sort of been the patron of a number of clandestine and anonymous kind of right-wing intellectual types and currents. With Elon Musk, he has made it his own kind of personal mission to go on a sort of one-man crusade, although that doesn't diminish his sort of power by any means, given he's one of the richest men, if not the richest in the world, vis-a-vis the trans issue, and also to tackle migration in Europe. So to what extent does ideology also play a part for these patrons, and what is their broader ideology, not just with respect to these two individuals who I mentioned?
Yeah, so I think the reason that there is the tech bros among us, if you will, that there are tech bros in the MAGA movement, in this thing we called nationalist populism, which I described in my essay as existing as a universal movement across the West, if not across the world, are for accidental reasons. And those accidental reasons are largely the selfish business interest that these men and women want to get around and make sure that they do well on. I don't find ideology a huge driving force for them. They might take on the aesthetics of a certain ideology for the short term, but ultimately there's no true blue believers in something that you would find equivalent to someone like at a rally with a placard, on the street in some European capital. Where there is an ideological current, like you would probably say an Iron Man version is Thiel, because he has been at this game a long time, and he's been funding intellectual development. I would say he's ultimately just a plain old libertarian. He might have flourishes where he'll get into more of this esoteric stuff, which touches upon the monarchism of Curtis Yarvin, or the working class struggle of Compact Magazine, or the even like post-liberal Catholicism of like a Patrick Deneen. Like, these would be things that are perhaps outside of libertarianism. There's ways that you could probably fold them into libertarianism. They certainly would represent something that's a little bit more substantive than your average Cato think tank worker would come up with. So Thiel's a more interesting person in a neutral sense in that regard, but ultimately he's coming at it from the point of view, again, like, how does this affect my business and my network of businesses, and give me more power and autonomy and less liability. And so everything that you see come out of ultimately his main current of intellectual output is hearkening back to that. And so even in the 0 to 1 book, which everyone references, it's almost glib to talk about it, but he says the true path to successful business is by forming a monopoly and reducing competition. And so, he has a more cynical version of libertarianism, where instead of using the government to get rid of competition, get rid of barriers to competition, and thus promote this flourishing of market activity, it's almost like he wants to utilize government to help his chosen business interests, and those business interests will flourish as monopolies in sort of a neo-monarchical feudal society. So that is the intellectual current that has, you could say, depth to Thiel, that some of the other guys that are, not thinkers, to put it lightly, that they don't have. So that's where you get into, well, if there is a version of crude libertarianism and in-depth libertarianism represented by Thiel, again, either of those are in conflict with national populism. And as I define in the essay, national populism is ultimately summed up by the long-term rejection of neoliberal economics, which has resulted in the 2008 financial collapse, the deindustrialization of the West, and the lingering, post-work society that we've now found ourselves in. So that's the long-term subtle undercurrent that has made people into dissidents. And then the more short-term obvious is the mass migration of non-Westerners into Western society. And so, these things make up nationalist populism, full stop. There are deeper and more in-depth ideologies in their own right that come from various different countries. But if we just use the rejection of neoliberal economics and the rejection of mass migration and immigration at large, the whole questioning of sort of the multicultural project, what you then find is that whole tech bro, like I said, crude and in-depth ideological currents, they kind of don't agree at all. They actually are made and minted by neoliberal economics. Many of these men benefited from it, and they actually seek a more extreme version of it. Their kind of critique is that it is not neoliberal enough. It is not libertarian enough. And so that's where you have like a big conflict, where I would say a national populist would want things like more regulation of the financial sector and promotion of the productive economy and steering investment into sort of hard industry, so forth and so forth. That creates a large consumer market of goods and supplies a lot of good jobs with good wages for your population. But then with the tech bros, they want to continue the deindustrial cycle and just promote these like Ponzi crypto scams. And so like right there, that's a big like divergence in thinking, where there is any sense of industrial ideation. It is on like a few startups that are just seeking government parasitism to get DoD contracts to do some sort of drone blip on the graph that doesn't really make a difference to the military industrial complex, but they'll get their government contracts regardless. So that really doesn't equate with anything that you would find in an economically literate industrial policy scene. So then if we square that away as number one, number two, the conflict in the immigration debate. I mean, this was best showcased over Christmas when Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, as representations of these tech bros, these new iterations of MAGA 2024, they completely spazzed out and made themselves look like contemptible fools when they embraced almost open border, high skill immigration, quote unquote, for H-1Bs in the United States. The entire, you could call them the MAGA 2016 purist base said, no, we're against all immigration. This could be best articulated by, let's say, maybe like a Steve Bannon, who was very livid with Elon Musk, and to this day says his vendetta for the next 4 years is to find a way to deport Elon Musk from the White House. So, and he's called them a techno-feudal oligarchy. So that's where you have this big divide there. And so how can one really find common ground now that we're outside of a campaign in the act of governance, when there is a huge disagreement on these two fundamental issues that define national populism? And so I say you cannot find common ground. And while the United States is a very different entity for various reasons, and the MAGA 2024 coalition, the bet is made there, Europe does not necessitate itself and its nationalist populist movements to actually embrace and this is an important point. When we say tech bros, we're mostly referring to American centric tech bros. There's really no tech bro without America in it. 50% of the venture capital funding is in the United States. There's various other metrics and trends I could go into why a European tech bro would find himself over in America. Ireland's three unicorns of startups that it has, founded by Irish, people. I believe two of them are mainly headquartered and started in the United States. Stripe and Intercom. So you can get a sense of, the the pros and cons of whatever's going on in America affects the tech bros at large, and how then they try to affect change in Europe. And so for those reasons, yeah, I would say there was no need for European nationalist populist movements to embrace tech broism for its universal conflictions with the attributes of nationalist populism, and the fact that it is so American-centric that it really will not further the true individual interest of European nations.
On his podcast, The MAGA Era, Irish America's New Identity, David McWilliams states, "I've been told that the Irish diplomats who are trying to get an audience with Trump in Florida cannot even get a few minutes with some of the sons." In light of Conor McGregor's recent discussion with the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, among other notables in Trump's circle, it is by no means mere conjecture to contend that Trump's regime is eschewing traditional representatives of foreign nations in favour of figures who are ideologically aligned. Do you believe that Trumpism will generate conditions that may be leveraged by national populists on the European continent to the detriment of their status quo?
Conor McGregor is obviously not a tech bro himself and has his own unique career history and why he's running. I think he's been a very controversial figure, for sure, for right and wrong, in that he has tried to vocalize the grievances of the nationalist populace in Ireland over the years, while also perhaps not having a core ideology figured out and having personal failings, of course. And so, like, I would never per se kind of just fold him into sort of this grouping of conflict that I have with sort of rejecting the tech bros, the MAGA libertarians, all that type of stuff. But for the sake of the conversation, I think if you analyze him as a product of a U.S. company, the UFC, as business ties in America as well, that Dana White, the best friend of Donald Trump in a certain sense, was probably the core conduit for McGregor to find his way in, and Dana White and other social media influencers, like Conor was seen with, like, the Paul brothers and all these people. Like, even though that's not directly tech, you could say that the sort of UFC social media Joe Rogan sphere that certainly McGregor is a part of is aligned in certain ways with that tech bro faction. And so, and some of the stuff that he says, or he's been seen with in this sort of DC visit, would give rise to, I mean, he went to the crypto ball, for instance, which you could say is him lobbying certain bigwigs in tech to support him, perhaps. That's why he was there, just to make nice with them. So I would say my read on McGregor right now and what he's trying to do is sort of the most popular vehicle that American interests would have in Ireland to sort of disrupt it. And to your point that he is being used as an insult to official Ireland, to say we will freeze you out of any diplomacy and we rather talk to this controversial UFC figure than you. Certainly that's meant to be an insult. And to the degree that, okay, well, does McGregor help the authentic interest of nationalist populists? It's perhaps yet to be seen, but where I would categorize him with the tech bros in my general analysis, it's that what the nationalist populace needs to do is get the majority of the country on his side. And what I see the tech bros and McGregor-ism doing to the Irish national populism, or, you could categorize as the Irish right, I think it would inject it with a force that would, number one, monopolize all of the market share of attention and energy in the movement. And so any other current of national populism would sort of fade away or have to be absorbed into the tenets of what would then manifest. The number two, I think there would be a hard ceiling on that type of manifestation of a sort of Americanized, kind of MAGA 2024 right in Ireland. And you would just calcify left-wingers and centrists and even, center-rightists away. So while there would probably be a boost from, let's just say, in my recollection, nationalist populism in terms of candidates' voter share in the last election, maybe did somewhat like 5% of the national vote. Depending on where you went, maybe it was a little bit higher or lower, but let's call it 5%. McGregor in a presidential election for Ireland could maybe top out at 20%, which would be a tripling of that. He probably could squeak out like a TD run in a really friendly constituency. But when you put it in those terms, it's like, okay, granted, you'll get sort of a accelerated growth. Perhaps you'll have like higher definition cameras to record your podcast that you do. You're going to get a lot of like boosting on X, on Twitter. And but I just don't see how that actually equates to like, that won't win the presidential election. The presidential seat doesn't have real power. And then, even then, if he goes for a TD seat, he's one man that doesn't have power and he doesn't have a party around him. And I don't see how you could extend the personality cult of McGregor to any other person for those types of ideas, because you would be running on the personality cult, not so much, the ideas per se. People would graft on the ideas to the personality cult. So that's where I look at it and I say, ultimately, the benefits are, aesthetic in nature, they're illusory, and it's ultimately a distraction. Whether McGregor himself does this unique spearheading of it, or it's just sort of the tech bros fund a bunch of other candidates and think tanks and blah, blah, blah. And they come up with these sort of inauthentic, non-Irish sort of ideas. Yeah, it would just calcify the left, the right, the center, and the center right away from that per se, and you would just get sort of a stalling out of what really needs to happen. Now, to whatever degree some of those ideas penetrate further and actually become policy, because I would say like the back channels that the Stripe brothers with Progress Ireland and so forth can do within Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are probably more productive for them than them actually getting candidates in power. So, to the degree that that's probably the most likely thing to happen, what you would get is like Patrick Collison has shared stuff where he's a supporter of open borders, like infinity immigrant, open borders. So like this is an obvious like non-starter that these people would have a seat at the table, and it's almost like going in the complete opposite direction and a worse version of the current paradigm of Irish politics. So that's where it's just like, what is the goal here? Is it to do like a social media podcast with like a C-tier Trump connected celebrity? I don't view that as the goal of a political movement. I believe the political movement's goal should be getting somewhere around like 50% of the country or more on your side. And you can only do that by going to the left and going to the center. So that's where I kind of conclude things on that matter. And yeah, I'm willing to be challenged on that by anybody, but unfortunately, no one's wanted to debate the substance of the essay so far.
We saw with respect to the grooming gang scandal in the UK how Musk was able to revive an issue which has been known, I think, known about since at least 2012, 2014, but has been able to sort of reinsert it into the national conversation to the point that it was being debated in the British Parliament. How do these patrons of Trump, such as Musk, plan to influence Europe and the world more broadly?
Yeah, so, there's things about the American impact on European politics that are both exoteric and esoteric. They're personal reactions. They're also the outcomes of a zeitgeist. And so I would never pin it down to one exact thing, but I'll start with a piece of advice I've maybe given 50 people individually by now, which is read Trump's Art of the Deal. No one, I think, has actually done that yet, funny enough. But I encourage people to read it to actually understand the psychology of Trump as the, head of the zeitgeist right now. And one of the things that you can learn from that is Trump's negotiating style is that he will inflict maximum stress on the counterparty of any negotiation to achieve his desired outcome. And then once the deal is struck, he's best friends. You can find articles from his first term about, how he has a bromance with Macron in France. So, the degree that there's any real longevity to the hostility that you see in any given spat with a given politician is only representative of a specific negotiation that Trump and America at large is trying to get out of them. And then once they cave, they'll be nice again. So then you have to look at it from the point of view, what does America and Trump want from England and so forth and so forth. To whatever degree, I haven't really calculated that exact desire yet from the Americans. Perhaps they just are totally uncomfortable with a Labour government and Keir Starmer, and they would prefer to see a Tory get in, which is the most likely outcome, or if reform can find a sort of a surge and take over, that's what they would want. And so they would have a more American aligned. I would go against perhaps even saying ideologically aligned, but an American aligned faction in the Parliament of the UK. So to that end, you see a lot of nationalist populists that will take the red meat of a specific issue that has been going on for close to a decade, which no one ever talked about before, but is now being used for a very specific strategic purpose, and we'll try to conceptualize that as a win. Perhaps I won't say I'm against crimes being punished and investigations being done and taking a win when you can get it. But yeah, I would look at it from the point of view that these are being done not for your benefit, but for the strategic negotiation purposes of either getting an unreasonable counterparty out of the way or forcing that counterparty into a maximum stress position to achieve results. So we'll see what will happen within the UK. When it comes to Ireland, we obviously can see this when it comes to the multinational question, how Trump wants to reel back the trade surplus that Ireland has with America, the American companies that report their revenues in Ireland where they could be in America, and acutely, I mean, the tech jobs kind of, but the real jobs are the pharma jobs that Ireland has. And so taking those jobs back as well into the U.S. And then, of course, there's the sort of foreign policy disputes when it comes to the Israeli war, that Ireland is obviously on the other side of America. And so there's the long-term economic consideration, which I've said in other places, I don't think that's stopping. I don't think you're really going to do anything to stop that. I think America is just going to pressure Ireland wherever it can to drop its Israel positions. And again, I don't, there's maybe some carved out, deals that can be struck there to save some of the multinational sector for Ireland. That's probably what the most likely big negotiation is going to happen. But again, that sort of we're sort of getting away from like why we have nationalist populism. It's like none of those things and the red meat tactics that will be used to pursue them are anyway in the long term going to solve the conundrums of the neoliberal economy in Ireland or the presence of mass migration. And like, as I've written about, let's say, Sweden and Denmark in the past, these are left, or at least with Denmark, it was a left-wing government that came in and decided to start stopping immigration, started to reject the tenets of sort of a multicultural project. And this was done all without the influence of a MAGA 2024 movement or a tech bro nexus. And so this is where I say the actual like healthy direction to go in is to bring the left and the center away from their sort of cultural left-wing issues and bring them into the right, and have the right, in a sense, kind of preserve some of the economic leftism as sort of a negotiation there. And so that's where I would advise the attention should go into, and not any of this stuff of, being an observer in the peanut gallery of a macro American-European dispute that in the end, the people involved don't have your true interests at heart.